The South African Digital Marketing Podcast is made in collaboration with Sean Lutz. Coming up in this episode of the South African Digital Marketing Podcast.
You're staring straight into my soul here. Act like you're already in the role that you're aiming to be in.
And it's no surprise, I guess, that communication is really important.
One of the things about marketing is obviously everybody thinks they know the answer.
No one's going to call Terrence a visionary, but it gets the job done cheaply.
And the best way to grow your skills is to grow your responsibility.
Welcome to Season 3 of the South African Digital Marketing Podcast. My name is Terrence Mentor, and I'm a digital marketer who's realized that since this industry is constantly changing, we need to be constantly learning. And the best way to learn all the things is by talking to the people who are doing all of the things. In Season 3, I'll be talking to CMOs, heads of marketing, and other leaders of marketing people about the reality of their positions. In this episode, I chatted to Dylan Bosman, Director of Marketing of BluLever Education. You can find out more about Dylan and the work that he does by following him on LinkedIn. The link to that is in the show notes. Our conversation for this episode focused on how to use small experiments to justify bigger risks, how to grow your team when necessary, and what it really takes to be a director of marketing. So let's get into it. Here's Dylan.
I currently am the Director of Marketing for BluLever Education. And essentially, we're trying to reinvigorate the trades in South Africa. We're based in Braamfontein. We've got a wonderful campus out there, and I've had an incredible journey of being able to grow with this business from being the third hire. And 4.5 years later, we're at about 50 team members. So it's really a journey of growth, of visions from the co-founders and storytelling and brand.
So you mentioned that this has been a journey of growth over the last 4 years. You kind of started, your role was a marketing manager, and now it's become director of marketing. Between that, there's been several title changes, I would say title bumps as you're going along. And it seems like that's quite a dramatic increase in just 4 years. Can you tell us a little bit about how that happened? How you went from, I don't want to say merely a marketing manager, but a marketing manager to director?
When it comes to startups, this is one of the great perks of rolling up your sleeves and getting stuck in at a startup, because you have that opportunity for exponential growth if you're putting in the work. And I also don't want to give myself all the credit. Definitely not. It's something I feel very fortunate to be in that role and to have the opportunity to lead in the organization. And I definitely would not have had that opportunity if it weren't for the co-founders and the other mentors mentors and partners that they have, who are sort of friends of BluLever, that have helped us all along the way. In terms of the step up and the shifting and changing roles, I think, that speaks a lot again to just the nature of a startup. Things are unpredictable. At one point, we had student recruitment, which was this kind of emerging department when we hit about 15 people and we became fully operational. And so that crying baby needed a parent to nurture it. And so I stepped up to the plate, as it were, and I jumped in to the deep end. And I think it was very valuable for me, because I learned a lot of project management and, really stepped up on my operational expertise, dipping into that role. And I think as a marketer, I heard you say it in one of the other podcasts, and it resonated with me, is like just getting to grips with what really matters to a business is critical. If you're missing that, I think you're not going to actually be able to shift the needle with the marketing you're doing. And if you're out of touch with that, the business is going to suffer. It might not be in the short term, but in the long term, it will.
I find it so interesting that you talk about taking that risk of jumping into a startup, rolling up your sleeves and doing all the little bits and bobs and even more work than you might expect. Because when you're looking on LinkedIn, if you're looking for a head of marketing or a director of marketing role, any sort of leadership role in marketing, they'll always say you need 5 to 6 or 10 years experience, leading a team. but you can't get that experience without leading a team. So really, I think a lot of people ask that question, like, how do I jump into that cycle? And it feels like you've given us a little bit of a cheat code there, where you're having to find a place where you can start at the ground and you're able to grow as the company grows.
Yeah.
Did you feel that that part of the plan, or did that kind of just happen?
I was quite intentional about being like, when I was looking for my next role, it was during COVID. It was quite a hectic time in the job market, and I've never been someone very driven by sort of your paycheck. I was more driven by the ability to grow and learn. And the co-founders were always people that I'd admired and respected, and so that was one of the reasons why I wanted to step into that role. So there was definitely intentionality behind it, but how it has panned out is a whole different story, you know. And I think, like, coming back to the sort of advice to a young marketer early on in their career, and they're thinking about, okay, how do I shift gears into management or into a director level role? My biggest piece of advice would be, act like you're already in the role that you're aiming to be in. So just take on more responsibility. When that responsibility is being offered up, which it always is in a fast moving company, take it on and do it well. And when you're taking things on and you're doing them well, you're going to be asked to move up a tier or move into a role that suits that level of responsibility. The thing is, we often we are a bit scared of hard work, and we have, I guess, delusions about what it means to step into the next level. We think we might look at people and go, oh no, this was because of someone's father or mother, or some inside angle. But I think really a lot of it does come down to taking opportunities, trying to take responsibility for additional work.
I think a lot of what you're saying, I completely agree with, but I can hear that some people might kind of push back and say there is a risk with doing that, because you might be doing more work, you might be working at a level way above yours, and that might create a space where there's no incentive for the company really to, promote you or give you that new position, because, hey, you're doing it already, so I don't see why we should do that. Yeah. Is that a risk that you take, and is there still a benefit despite the risk to push on and do that higher level work?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I think, like, definitely you could feel like you might run the risk of being taken advantage of, but I think, like, ultimately the best investment is in your own skills and skill set, and the best way to grow your skills is to grow your responsibility. As an education company that trains apprentices, we're all about people upskilling and gaining more skills. So I think it's what's really cool is that lesson translates into the marketing space perfectly. If you're taking on responsibilities, you're gaining more skills, and you get to take those away with you. If you decide that that's not being seen or acknowledged, the additional responsibility you've taken on, you get to take those to your next role, and you might be able to promote yourself by shifting roles.
Eventually, someone is going to see the value that you're able to create. That's the hope, and that's the goal, I guess. Yeah. I would love to talk more about the practical kind of work that you do. Could you tell me about what the marketing team looks like? What does marketing look like at BluLever? What are some of the priorities that you're currently dealing with as director of marketing?
Yeah, sure. So we've got a a very lean marketing team, and there's a lot to get done. So I think everything we try to do has to be quite high leverage, and I think that's the case for most SMEs and still growing organizations and startups. So for us, one of the focuses is PR, and I think it's a great pillar no matter how big your team is. I think it's critical is to figure out how to build a PR rhythm. And if anyone's ever curious, please reach out or listen to one of the podcasts with some of the incredible PR geniuses that you've had previously, Terrence. But yeah, I think PR is an important pillar. And the reason being is that it's about growing your network PR. PR is not just reaching out to a journalist and, getting featured in an article, the first article is never going to be the article you want. It's about building a relationship with journalists so that when a story comes up that really does suit the stories that you're trying to tell as a brand, you're going to be the first person they reach out to. And so when it comes to PR, I think it's critical that, people just jump into the deep end and get started and really try to just learn from whoever they can about how they set up the PR arm of the business. So that's definitely one of the focuses. I would say, and like another one of our main projects right now is we've set up a small YouTube studio. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to carve out a new platform with YouTube, and we're trying to create a place where we're catching young fixers and young people at the moment they're thinking of fixing something. Because as we all do, we head over to YouTube and say, this tap's broken, it's this model, like how do we fix it? And so we're trying to capture that audience at the source, because those are the young people that we ultimately want to come and do apprenticeships with us. And so it's been quite a journey. We've partnered with a manufacturer brand that have helped us fund our first series of 5 how-to videos, and we've set up a studio from scratch. So we shoot these videos in our workshop. We've launched our first how-to video, and I think what I'm really excited about there is it's evergreen content, and it's content that is like perfectly aligned with our brand and perfectly connected to our audience. But it's also exciting and fresh. Like if you go and look at how-to videos in the apprentice or artisan space in South Africa, you're going to be disappointed by the level of entertainment and professionality, etc. It's not at the usual standard we know and love from YouTube. And so that's really what we're trying to connect with. I'll let you know how we're going once we're at least 10 videos deep.
I think actually that's how you and I connected, because I happened to see one of that first video.
Oh, cool.
And I was so taken aback by I'm not a very hands-on person. I mean, like I was telling you off before we started recording, I have an old house that is constantly needing things repaired. So I'm doing exactly what you're saying. I'm going and researching on YouTube, like, how do I fix this weird electrical unit from 1984 or whatever. And so when I came across that video on LinkedIn, I was like, this is what I would love to watch. It was entertaining. It was fun. Still gave me the information that I would have needed if I needed that bit of information at the time.
Thank you so much.
Sure. And as someone who creates content a lot, I know how hard it is to do exactly what you're talking about, to kind of tick all those boxes and have a high quality product that, kind of keeps the brand as high as possible. That must be so that must be quite a nerve-wracking project to start, because it's quite a expensive and time-consuming endeavor, and potentially not much payoff. Was that been quite scary?
Yeah. Look, there's a big risk involved, and I feel like you're staring straight into my soul here, because it's one of those things where you've not only do you have to pitch it, then you got to tell people I believe in it so much that you should spend money on it. Then you've actually got to do it. You got to buy the cameras, the lighting, and while I do know that's sort of a lot of my background is more in the video production space, I do know my way around production. You've still got a team that you've got to train and help them figure out the various roles, because productions they can't be run by one person, so you've really got to make sure everyone is also figuring out that production space. But the great thing is YouTube is cheeky, and you can cut some corners if you know which ones to cut. But I think it is a leap of faith, and I think we couldn't really take that leap without making sure that what we're trying to do aligns with our brand and our brand strategy, and could be used in various different contexts. So, for example, that content can be repurposed and plugged into our curriculum development, which is a powerful piece of IP later down the line, if this production studio really starts to develop the momentum we hope that it does. And so there are a couple of little payoffs in that way. I think, also if it's at a high enough quality, brands will want to get behind you and help fund the production of those videos. So that's another part of the bet that we're making. And I think, it's still too early to tell. And we're into our second video. We're like deeply into the edits on that one. But yeah, a lot of the challenge I'm finding is how do you optimize the workflow so that you're able to create this content efficiently, but in a way that doesn't let your audience down, like in a way that just it still connects and is engaging and resonates.
And in a world that is kind of being flooded with AI slop, to have something that's made by people for people, it does really feel quite human and resonant, and hopefully that makes it stand out even more than the artificial voiceover with some like really bad visuals that most YouTube DIY videos are.
Yeah, I hope so too.
Yeah. So we're talking about that the the video studio and the production being a bit of a challenge. What other kind of challenges do you face specifically as a marketing leader? I'm thinking about being the go-between between the founders of the business and maybe your marketing team, or potentially having to deal with people who have a lot of opinions about marketing without maybe having the experience of marketing to back up those opinions. Are those some of the challenges that you face?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. One of the things about marketing is obviously everybody thinks they know the answer, and everyone will also take a guess. Whereas in certain spaces they'll be like, no, let's leave it to the experts. So I think that means you've got to be developing a level of diplomacy, but more than that, I think it's really about the brand story that you're telling is not just external, it's internal as well. You've constantly got to be using touch points to share the brand story with the team, so that when people do have ideas about the marketing, it's probably going to be in line with the brand strategy. And then if you're sharing that story internally, people are also more likely to invite you into the brainstorm rather than telling you, hey, this is the strategy we want to roll out. They're gonna start seeing you as the brand experts in the business. So I think that's a really important lesson that I've learned from one of the co-founders, is that it's critical if you're a marketing team lead, you got to get the marketing team in front of the rest of the business, at least once a quarter, but ideally once a month, to be like, hey, this is something we created. This is how you should use it. I think those things are really, really important touch points.
Just really pulling people in. And it's no surprise, I guess, that communication is really important just as a business leader, I guess, but even more so as a marketing leader. I found in my business too, especially where you're working on a global front for my organization, it's really crucial to have regular checkups. There's no such thing as a marketing strategy that doesn't have 10 other people outside the marketing team coming in and giving their support and their input. So I can totally see what you're saying, pulling people in earlier rather than, oh, by the way, we did this thing 6 months ago. Here's the results. Nothing you say will affect that at this point. It's way too late. It's really important. What about managing that balance between the expectations that gets placed on marketing versus the budget that gets given to marketing? Is that a challenge?
Yeah, I think definitely it is a challenge. I think that there are two aspects to that one. The one is you have to get comfortable and you have to get used to doing a lot with a little. And then you have to get good at checking that what you're doing is having an impact. So what I call it is it's something that I actually learned. I put it in my newsletter from Anne Laura Lecumpf, and she talks about tiny experiments. And I think it's such a critical thing for marketing, is that you should try to always break down whatever that bigger project is into little windows where you can reevaluate, particularly if it's new territory. If you've got an SEO expert and you have the budget for that, then great, they're going to tell you what to do most of the time. But if it's a space where perhaps you're venturing into a bit of SEO because you've realized this is a critical thing so that you can be found on the internet, then I would say break it up into a tiny experiment. Do a portion of it that you can measure as an MVP, and then take a look at the results, and keep adjusting and learning. You can't just roll out a strategy and have a look 1 quarter later and think, okay, that's something that's going to get you to where you go. It just doesn't work like that.
So a lot of experimentation and I guess data to back up what you think is the next way forward. And do you feel like you would have to do that for the rest of the business, where if you are presenting a new strategy or a new brand system or a new campaign, that you also have to justify that spend to the business?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the YouTube project was a really good example of that. And I think you often have to. What's great is it brings you, if you like this sort of thing, it brings you closer to the real nuts and bolts of the business. So you have to think a lot more carefully about revenue, because you're often the person spending a big portion of the business's money, and so. I think, that YouTube project was a good example where we had to think about how do we get some money into the business in order to be able to fund that campaign and that idea. So a lot of the time you having to think quite creatively and thinking about, okay, cool, we'll pitch this partner of ours and, this is how we'll structure it. And so I really enjoy that part because it brings you closer to the actual nuts and bolts of the business, what makes things tick.
And I guess that really does bring it back to what we were saying earlier about if you're wanting to grow as a marketing leader, you definitely have to come in and understand what the business is. Because I remember when I first started, I had loads of like incredibly creative ideas that was fun. And, it doesn't matter how much it's going to cost. It doesn't matter what the results are. The fact is we're going to do good work. And then you realize, no, you go off and make your own podcast, Terrence. If you want to do a podcast about marketing, go do it yourself. Yeah. Everything that we do has to have at some point a return on that investment. Completely. That's what the point of a business is. And I needed to go through a process of maturing and maybe getting some stars out of my eyes a bit before I realized actually, even if it's the most mundane thing, like, yes, it's an email campaign, but you know what? It's super cheap and it's actually going to work. Cool. It's not. You're not going to write a book about it. You're not going to become a bestseller author.
Totally. No
one's going to call Terrence a visionary, but it gets the job done cheaply.
We all have to go through that lesson to a certain extent. I think it's just one of those critical learning curves of, I can't just be a creative. And then the next step is like, actually the creativity is within the constraints of like making sure this business is generating an income and fulfilling its mission,
I would love to kind of shift over into maybe thinking, being a bit future focused. Sure. All of the campaigns you do are incredibly successful. The YouTube thing works out amazingly well. This is all hypothetical at the moment. You're now given triple the budget, 10 times the budget, whatever. And you're thinking that it might be time to grow your team. How do you know that it's the right time to grow your team?
Again, I would probably tie it to a new function that is bringing in revenue. So if you're starting to see that this YouTube studio is really having an uptick and it's starting to become a platform the home of artisans for South Africa, then I think you've got a motivation for saying, hey, like, we're really stretched when we're in production. Someone's holding the camera and the other person's holding the boom and we'd love to hire a boom guy. It'll take a bit more pressure off us and it'll help us move quicker. I think that's a good example of where you might want to bring someone in. And so, I think it's going to be connected to the sort of responsibilities that are pushing forward the business's objectives. I know that sounds very high level, but yeah, I think that's right.
Because I've spoken to one or two other marketing leaders about this, and they have a very similar sentiment to yours, and it almost feels like you have to get to a point where the team is already stretched.
Yeah.
It's sometimes difficult to make that judgment before that moment. It's not like you can anticipate, oh wait, in a year's time, we're all going to be maxed out. You kind of have to wait for that moment before you can start to justify adding people on, which is kind of unfortunate, but I guess that's just the reality of business.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, AI is making this a bit more confusing as well, because I think it's giving a couple, 2xing a lot of our productivity. So that makes things a bit more tricky. But yeah, it is a challenging thing, if you're getting to a point where your team is too stretched, sometimes it also doesn't coincide with getting the results you want, and so you're always trying to figure out how to problem solve the more difficult people aspect.
So then, again, looking into this future, it's now decided that actually you do need to add an out and out marketer or some new kind of role to your team. What are you looking for in that new member of your team? What kind of personality traits are you excited about? Maybe what specific skills do you think are important to have? Do you have any kind of idea around that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, when it comes to culture fits and personality types, it's a tricky one, because you want to keep adding to the diversity of your team. I see it time and time again. The more different perspectives you have in a brainstorm, the often it gets to a great place, if you know how to brainstorm well. Not always. But so that's one aspect of it, is to keep increasing the diversity of the ways in which people think within your team. But the other aspect from a culture point of view, for me, is I always want to work with people who are trying to be conscientious, or really pushing to do their best level of work. And so I think that's something that I'm always trying to look for when I'm hiring. Is this someone who really cares about the work, who's almost obsessed about the work that they're doing? And then also, is this someone who's grateful for the opportunities they've had so far? Because I think that's the kind of conscientious person that is going to be a team player, and that is going to slot into a team in a way in which they're not going to fight with people. They're going to create harmony within your team.
So really like that kind of attitude of, I can do the job, but I'm grateful for the position.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a level of confidence without being arrogant. That's, you're kind of finding a balance
For
there.
sure. Humility through and through.
If you find that person, please let me know. I'm sure it's a lot harder to find than one might think.
Yeah, and I think also quite tough to interview for, so you're in this process of interviewing, and how do you actually uncover what is real and isn't? I think there's definitely an artistry to the interview process. I think going on to your question around skills, what are you looking for in terms of skills? That's where I think an assignment is critical in an interview process. So, for instance, if you're looking for a copywriter, I would say, someone shouldn't just submit an assignment of copy they've written. Firstly, there's, as we know, ChatGPT might really get involved and be writing a lot of that for someone. But then it's how do you unpack that assignment afterwards and explore and get an understanding from that person of how they understand and see their craft. And I think that can be applied to anything. If it's copywriting, if it's SEO, if it's design, you want someone to do work as per a brief that you've shared, and then to unpack it for you so that you can get access to their mind and really understand how do they think about this work, because that's what's going to tell you what you need to know about whether they can deliver or not.
Yeah, really trying to figure out what their approach is, because I can imagine that some people, someone like me, I'm a little bit scattered. I do a little bit of work there, a little bit of work there, and as much diversity as you want in your team, sometimes people's work approach can clash. Not better or
Yeah,
worse,
yeah.
just it's not going to function well in the way the rest of the team functions. Just someone might actually be a bit of a grenade thrown into your team. It is interesting that you talk about the struggles of interviewing, because, we've all been on the other side of that, where we've had to interview for a job. You wanted to put your best foot forward. The one thing I've seen more and more come up when people are talking about how to interview in a job is that it's good to ask questions as the interviewee.
Yeah.
And I would love to pick your brain about that. Do you find does that build your confidence in the person? Or are you a little bit annoyed by like, hey, listen, I am interviewing you for a job, not the other way around? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think like it really depends on the kind of question the person is asking, so if it's a question where you can see this person is trying to get a feel for the business, a feel for the team, and it shows a level of care and consideration about, and also a sense that they've started to generate a picture of what it actually might be like working within this organization. Those are always great questions to ask, because I think those sorts of questions build trust for someone who's interviewing you. They tell the person that, hey, you're already seeing yourself there. So I think that's a great way to be able to communicate your conscientiousness and your eagerness to be part of the organization. Questions not to ask are, whenever it's a question that doesn't feel true to you, it's something you've just Googled and it says, yeah, you should ask everyone this question at the end of the interview, because you're going to ask that question with the wrong energy. It might be the right question, but if it's not a question you actually want the answer to, you're going to ask it flat, and the person interviewing you is going to know it.
I discovered very early on that a question that again, because, I struggle with imposter syndrome and just the way my brain works. The one question that really brings me at ease or used to bring me at ease when I used to do interviews, was to ask the question, why me? I know you got a bunch of people applying, so why did you choose my CV out of the pile? And that helped me for a couple of ways. Firstly, their answer generally gave me some self-confidence, because they normally say it's an opportunity for them to compliment me. Basically, I'm fishing for compliments at that point. But also, it tells you a lot about the kind of organization that they are, because if they're saying, oh, we really liked your jokey vibe, then it's like, okay, well, I'm not sure if I want to be the joking person in this position. Yeah. Or whatever it is, it does tell you a lot about where their brain is at. So I hope I haven't potentially lost jobs because of that question.
No, I think that's a great question. I guess it also it helps them set expectations in terms of how they've interpreted what you've put forward. It's probably landed you jobs, Terrence.
We're ears hoping. Just like the last question I want to ask, you've actually given a lot of advice already, so this feels a bit of an unfair question, but we've spoken a lot about being conscientious, about working and doing the work beyond your position. If you're wanting to be moving up, if you want a certain role, try and do the work of that role already. So kind of just, summing up some of the big pieces of advice you've already given. But what other advice would you maybe give to someone who's looking at you and going, one day I would love Dylan's position. Like one day Dylan moves on, he becomes a CMO of BluLever or somewhere else, hopefully BluLever, and someone else needs to move into that position. What advice would you give to a young marketer who is hoping to be in your role one day?
Yeah, I think like the first thing I would say is just, you can do it. Like, of course you can. If you've put that barrier to entry in your mind, then it's going to make things a lot more difficult. And then I would say what one of my co-founders has shared with me many times, Adam, which is try to work hard every day. Try to build a consistent professional rhythm where you're able to forward your goals day by day. Like try to shift out of what becomes definitely an aspect of uni at points, which is these hard sprints for deadlines, and try to manage your deadlines within an organization in a way where you feel comfortable, where you feel like you've built a lifestyle where you're largely on top of your work. Because if you do that, you're going to be growing the skills you need to lead. You know, in order to manage a workload like that, you have to communicate. You have to tell your manager if they keep dumping work on your plate last minute and they're putting you under pressure, you know, and you have to figure out ways how to change and shift that.
A big thank you to Dylan for his time and his insights. If you want more conversations just like this one, don't forget to subscribe to the SA Digital Marketing Podcast. And of course, follow me on LinkedIn. The links to all of that will be in the show notes. Thanks for listening. This was the SA Digital Marketing Podcast.